Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional League, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm Jeremiah, and we're back again with another action-packed episode for you guys again. And the big story I think that came about, that really spoke out to me and really took my eye, especially from a fantasy perspective, is Andrew Luck. And he said that his 2015 injury went on and lingered into 2016. And if you look at his stats from 2016, they're actually really good. You know, he threw for 31 touchdowns, threw for over 4,000 yards for the third time in his career. And 2015, remember, that was the year when he got plagued with injuries, including a shoulder injury and a lacerated spleen. He only played in 7 games that year. But it looks like that Andrew Luck finally has that behind him. He looks like he decided to have surgery on that shoulder this year. And he said that it came about after a game against Tennessee 2 years ago. So this is what Andrew Luck said on Monday regarding that injury. He said, quote, "It originally occurred a couple years ago against Tennessee. We sort of sat down after that year and felt like rehab was the way to go. And I think that was the absolute correct decision. We did some things. This year happened, obviously, and it transpired through this year. And we sat down after this year and decided that maybe it was time to do surgery on the shoulder." So, Andrew Luck was speaking during the team's first day of voluntary off-season workouts. Luck said, the procedure on his shoulder was absolutely his decision. The team went out and got a lot of really good opinions from a lot of doctors around the country. Luck said that he has no regrets about getting surgery. And he says that there's obviously always a uncertainty about what the doctors say, if he's 100% or not. So, we don't know if Andrew Luck was fully healthy last year. It looks like he was playing with an injury, with an injured shoulder, a throwing shoulder for that matter, and he also had a thumb injury as well. So the last July, Andrew Luck did say that he had lingering shoulder issues, but he didn't say where they came from at that point. He did say that he knew he wasn't playing well, whether he was injured or not. So he doesn't think that the shoulder injury really plagued him. But heading to this year now, his outlook. Is Andrew Luck fully healthy? Well, it looks like that he is fully healthy. He's ready to pretty much take the next step, so to speak. The Indianapolis Colts as a team haven't been really good. Andrew Luck, on the other hand, has been phenomenal. Ever since 2014, he's been one of the top fantasy quarterbacks. 2014, he was a top fantasy quarterback. 2015, he kind of had a down year. Not kind of, but he really did. He only threw for 15 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. that was the year when he only played 7 games, and he didn't even eclipse 2,000 yards yet. By 2016, he only missed 1 game. He threw for over 4,200 yards. He threw for 31 touchdowns, and this was with a bad shoulder as well. So, were Andrew Luck fully healthy, we could be getting the Andrew Luck we saw from 2014. He can possibly get 5,000 yards. He can possibly get 40 touchdowns again. And I do think that he could happen to become the top fantasy quarterback again. And, I think the thing that kind of helps Andrew Luck is that he's playing kind of like on a weak division as well. He does have the Texans, which are a really tough defense. He has them. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they're still putting the pieces together on that defense. We don't know how good they can be. And in Tennessee, they had some defensive problems last year. So, as a team, the Colts are, they're in a very good spot, I think. They're in a very bad division. But, from a fantasy perspective, I do think Andrew Luck I think he has a chance to be the top fantasy quarterback again. Can he be this year's Matt Ryan? I think he can be this year's Matt Ryan times 2. I do think so. And he's definitely someone that I think he can be someone that you can rely on this year. Because, 2014, he was pretty much someone you can definitely rely on. 2015, when he had those injury problems, you had to have a backup plan. But, Andrew Luck, he's always been shy about talking about injuries in the past, which I was kind of surprised that he did bring this up on Monday. But remember, this injury happened week 3 of the 2015 season. So I should tell you that he's been dealing with the shoulder problems for 2 years. He's been dealing with this for 2 years. So I do think that this is a good thing. It's going to pretty much improve Andrew Luck. I think he is ready to. I think he's ready for a really good year. And Andrew Luck and the Colts, they did decide to rehab the shoulder, and they decided it was the best approach to take after 2015. And it looks like it wasn't the right decision because Andrew Luck was still having those shoulder problems as well. So, even owner Jim Irsay said last year during the team's trip to London that Andrew Luck aggravated the injury while he was trying to make a tackle following an interception that was returned for a touchdown by Aqib Talib in week 2. So, he's been pretty much playing banged up for a while now. Andrew Luck did wear a sling on his shoulder for part of the offseason, and he was listed as a full participant in 24 of the Colts' 48 practices last season. So, I think when we look at the future for Andrew Luck here in 2017, I do think he's in for a really big year. Remember, he threw for 31 touchdowns with a bad shoulder, so I think he can be even better. And I think that's kind of scary when you think about it. But he's someone that's probably going to get targeted in the 3rd round or in the 2nd round. If you really want a quarterback, if you're going to draft Andrew Luck, I would consider having a backup plan, a very strong backup plan, because you don't know, there's a risk of Andrew Luck always being injured. He's shown that he's been injury prone for the past 2 years. I think he's a great quarterback. I think he can be I think he's close to being that elite quarterback. Definitely heading to the top 5. He's definitely in the top 10 right now. But I do think he is someone that comes with risk because of those injury problems. But we know, I do think he's in for a good year. You never know. He can be MVP. I think he's a dark horse MVP candidate right now. Remember Matt Ryan? He wasn't even on anyone's MVP radar. And I do think that Andrew Luck is going to have a big year. And, if you guys do draft him, if you guys do draft him, make sure you have a backup plan ready to go. All right, well, I'm going to take my first break, and when I get back, I'm going to discuss Adrian Peterson possibly being a fit for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I'll discuss that when I return to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. Well, it looks like that Jameis Winston didn't really shy away when he was asked if he would want to play with Adrian Peterson, and he did say absolutely he would love to play with the former Minnesota Vikings running back. Well, if you don't know, Winston and Adrian Peterson, they have been working out together this offseason in Houston, and Winston, ever since, has raved about playing with Peterson when he returned to the Bucs facility on Monday. This is what he said, quote, "Being able to be in the presence of who many consider to be one of the greatest backs, especially of this generation, my generation, to be able to learn from and see his work ethic, to see the way he works, man, you really know why he's great," end quote. So, it looks like that Adrian Peterson, maybe if the Bucs were to be interested, he can possibly be a good fit. And I do want to point this out. That Doug Martin, he is pretty much, well, he's suspended for the first 4 games. And the running back situation in Tampa Bay is kind of very uncertain right now. You got guys like Jaquiz Rogers, Charles Sims right there. So they could possibly bring back LeGarrette Blount, who scored 18 touchdowns for the Patriots. They can possibly draft a running back. I think they can get Dalvin Cook. And they can possibly bring in Adrian Peterson. So they got some options there. So it's a very uncertain situation regarding fantasy right now. And, as I say, Tampa Bay has no financial obligation to Doug Martin for 2017 because of a 4-game drug suspension that voids his $7 million guarantee on his contract in 2017. So, it looks like Tampa Bay could cut Doug Martin. They can sign Adrian Peterson to a lesser value. And, it looks like that Winston has been impressed with Peterson and even brought some receivers with him. So he just looks like he's impressed to be around Adrian Peterson. So let's just say that Adrian Peterson happens to go back in the NFL next year. Well, he's not retired, so of course he'll go back. So let's just say if Adrian Peterson is signed. How is it going to do? I don't think he's going to be a starter. I've been saying this even on the football show, but I don't think he's going to be a starter at all. I think he's basically a role player at this point. I think if the Bucs happen to draft Dalvin Cook, I think he can be. I think they're going to split the carries. Dalvin Cook can be the passing back and the early down, the first and second down back. Adrian Peterson can be the third down And he can also be the goal line back. I think that'll be a great spot for Adrian Peterson because, when you have Adrian Peterson on the 1 yard line, it's a pretty scary thing. Pretty valuable weapon there. It's pretty scary. So I do think that's something that the Bucs will consider. But I do think the Bucs, they have a lot of offensive firepower this year. Jameis Winston, I think he can someone that can take the next step. I think he is someone that could be a very valuable fantasy quarterback. You got Mike Evans there. You got Deshaun Jackson. I think this is a team that could be a force to be reckoned with, especially in fantasy. But let's get back to Adrian Peterson here. And, he's coming off an injury. And he's coming off a pretty much an injury-plagued season that saw him being limited to 3 games. He rushed for a career low 72 yards on 37 carries. And there's a history of older running backs who changed teams when in their 30s. It hasn't been great. It isn't that doesn't mean that isn't holding them back from a potential Adrian Peterson and Tampa Bay marriage there. But when you think of older running backs, the most notable one I think of is Emmitt Smith. And remember, he had such great career with the Dallas Cowboys. He probably was one of the top franchise players in the 90s. It's definitely without a part one of the best running backs to play for that organization. No one remembers that he was with the Arizona Cardinals. No one does. And I don't think anyone ever will. But no one remembers Emmitt Smith with the Cardinals. I don't know anyone that does. Of course I remember, but not anyone will. But I do. We could potentially have 3 running backs over the age of 30 changing teams next year. Adrian Peterson's one of them because he's not going back to the Vikings. He's either going to go to Tampa Bay, and who knows what other team is interested. It looks like there's not really interest in Adrian Peterson right now, but I do think he will be on the team after the NFL draft. You got Marshawn Lynch, who is probably going to be on the Raiders. It's looking 90% likely, but nothing official has happened yet. Then we got Jamal Charles, who I think may be done. I do think he may be done as well. But, we could be having 3 running backs changing teams. And should the Tampa Bay Buccaneers take a shot at Adrian Peterson, I do think they should. If you look at their depth chart right now, there's really no one right now at the running back position. There's really no one. I did say Jacquizz Rodgers. I did say Charles Sims. But who else do they have? Of course, they got Doug Martin. I do think there's a chance that Tampa Bay could cut him. But I don't know if they will. Remember, Peyton Barber is still there. He got some time last year. So, do the Buccaneers really want to go into the year with Jacquizz Rodgers or Charles Sims as their starting running back? I don't think they want to. I think they will, but I don't think they want to. So, if Adrian Peterson happens to go to the Bucs, I do think it's going to happen after the draft because I think there's a chance that Tampa Bay will draft Dalvin Cook, and I do like Dalvin Cook. I think he's going to be a great running back in this league. He is a true 3-down back. I really do think that he can really help out the Buccaneers. So, as a fantasy perspective, if Adrian Peterson is with the Buccaneers, I think he's going to be a kind of a high-end RB3. That's basically his value. But when you look at the potential fits of Adrian Peterson, I still like him with the Giants. I still like him with the Raiders. If everything doesn't fall through with Oakland and Marshawn Lynch, if those talks happen to be disbanded, I can see the Raiders taking a flyer on Adrian Peterson and, pretty much having him as a starter for now. Because remember, the Raiders still have great depth. They still got Jalen Richard, DeAndre Washington. I don't know if the Raiders want to head into the year with those guys. And I still think the Raiders are going to draft a running back as well. Because why wouldn't you? There's so many running backs in this draft that are very talented. And that can be starters for a lot of teams. So I can see Adrian Peterson going to the Raiders, even if the Raiders do draft a running back. You can never have too much depth at the running back position. And the reason why I say Tampa Bay can cut Doug Martin is because running back position is something that you always want to get healthy and younger at. And I do think, I think Doug Martin is in his high 20s right now. I think the Bucs want to get a little bit younger at that position. I think Dalvin Cook is the perfect guy to do it, to pretty much be the starting running back for Tampa Bay. Remember, he is from Florida State, so he's going to a Florida team. But getting back to Adrian Peterson here and the potential fits, Tampa Bay is a great fit for him. I can see him being a very dominant role player. I think Houston is a very good place for him. He can be a very dominant role player behind Lamar Miller. I think for him to start, I think he will either have to go to the Giants or the Raiders. But it looks like the Raiders are going all in on Marshawn Lynch right now. And, the Giants, they haven't had any interest. I think the Giants are looking to the draft right now to get younger at that position. And remember, they still got Paul Perkins. And I'm very high on Paul Perkins this year. But overall, Adrian Peterson's fantasy look, he's someone that shouldn't even be on your starting lineup, and he's pretty much borderline on your bench right now. Doug Martin, as right now, he looks like he's someone that's more of a bench that can fill your bench right now since he's not going to play for the first 4 games. So depending on what the Bucs do with Doug Martin and what they do in the draft regarding the running back position, I do think that's something to look out for as well. All right, well, I'm going to take my last break, and when I get back, I'm going to discuss DeAndre Hopkins. He has some things to say about his season and how I think he can be a bounce-back candidate in fantasy. So I'm going to discuss DeAndre Hopkins when I return to the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. Well, last year, DeAndre Hopkins, his numbers decreased dramatically. From 2015, he had a year where he had 1,500 receiving yards, 111 receptions, and 11 touchdowns. 2016, his numbers went from 1,500 receiving yards to 954, 111 receptions to 78, and 11 touchdowns to 4. So DeAndre Hopkins did not have a great 2016. But, Hopkins did say he didn't have a down year. DeAndre Hopkins told the Houston Chronicle that, he did not have a down season. He says that it's a team sport and that he did his job. So I don't know if he's throwing shade at Brock Osweiler there, but kind of sounds like he's throwing shade at Brock Osweiler there. Houston coach Bill O'Brien did defend Hopkins against questions about whether he declined last year. And, Hopkins, he declined to say that, he had a down year. So, a receiver statistics rely heavily on the quarterback play. They rely heavily on the quarterback play. If you play in fantasy, you should know this. Just look at how Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders' numbers were when they were playing with Peyton Manning versus Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch. Just look at that. And remember, Brock Osweiler was the quarterback for Houston. So, when you look at Brock Osweiler, remember, he was pretty bad. He was probably one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, despite the Houston Texans making the playoffs. But, DeAndre Hopkins, I think he's a great talent in the league. I think he can be a top 5 receiver. Well, he was a couple years ago, especially with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Actually, no, it wasn't Ryan Fitzpatrick. It was Brian Hoyer. But I think, he went from being a top 5 to top 15 because of his quarterback. And that's not his fault. He did his job. Brock Osweiler just couldn't find him. Couldn't find him. And remember Anthony, who does this show on Fridays, he did have DeAndre Hopkins on his fantasy team, and he just hated having him because Brock Osweiler just couldn't stop throwing it to CJ Fedorowicz. And so, DeAndre Hopkins, I think he's going to have a great year. And I know they got Tom Savage at quarterback. I know. I have a feeling, though, that Houston is going to draft a quarterback. I would love to see Deshaun Watson throwing it to DeAndre Hopkins. I would like to see that. But I just can't see DeAndre Hopkins having another year like this. I can't see it at all from 2 straight years. So, I said before, receivers' statistics are very highly dependable on the quarterback. And if the quarterback doesn't have good stats, receivers are not going to have good stats. Hopkins did not have a good quarterback. Brock Osweiler was a quarterback. This year, he has Tom Savage. Maybe he can have a better year. Who knows? We don't even know who Houston's quarterback is going to be. But when you look at the quarterbacks on this roster, it's just Brandon Weeden and Tom Savage. So there could be a chance where DeAndre Hopkins could have an even more down year. And I think if the Texans, they happen to draft a quarterback, which I think they are, I think DeAndre Hopkins can have an even better year. He's going to help out one of those rookie quarterbacks. I think it's going to be either Patrick Mahomes, who has played at Texas Tech, so he does have that Texas connection there, and Deshaun Watson. So I do think DeAndre Hopkins could be in for a bounce back year if Houston can find a valuable quarterback. I thought that was going to be Tony Romo. Tony Romo did not want to play there. He ended up retiring. Well, I shouldn't say retiring, but he ended up walking away from the game and joining the CBS broadcast booth. But it remains to be seen who will be the starting quarterback for the Houston Texans. And, I think the Texans, I've said this constantly, I think they should take a chance on Colin Kaepernick or Jay Cutler. And they have two really good receivers that can really contribute right away. Whoever steps up at quarterback, Will Fuller, I think if he improves on his drops, he can be a really great fantasy receiver. And DeAndre Hopkins, I think he can be a top 5 receiver in the league. Definitely be in the top 5 in fantasy overall. All right, well, that's going to do it for me today. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. You can catch the show every week on multiple platforms: iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Stitcher, and on the GSMCpodcast.com website. We just happen to have all our shows on Blog Talk Radio, so you can catch them on there as well. You can follow the show on multiple social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. The Twitter and Instagram handle is at GSMCFootball, and Facebook is the Going to Be Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm Jeremiah. Thank you for tuning in to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You guys have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow.